There really is nothing like him since then. Rock music was never a form of entertainment. It was a form of spirituality. Incarnation makes more logical choice. So maybe the angels in the Bible are really alien. The greatest thing is self-knowledge.
Welcome back to the HDL podcast. Today, we're stepping off the beaten path and into the shadows of a legend. He was the king of rock and roll, a global icon, but what secrets lay beneath the sequin jumpsuits and chart-topping hits? Joining me is Miguel Conner of Eon Byte Gnostic Radio. Huge fan. I told you earlier, Apple Podcasts, we're going to put the link in there. I encourage everybody, if you're not listening to your radio program, you have to. You're also the author of the critically acclaimed Voices of Gnosticism and a deep diver into ancient mysteries and esoteric. El's latest book, The Occult Elvis, which we're going to get in today, on the system Bell, a side of Elvis Presley, I think a lot of people have never seen. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it, Miguel.
Glad to be on. Thanks for having me on.
I want to get into a little bit of the hidden path of Elvis's occult side. Can you, I know your book reveals this, the mystic, that side, and you say he's the greatest magician America. What does that look like coming from this public image of this conservative Southern Christian to all of a sudden, there's this side of Elvis that no one's ever seen, this clean cut Elvis. And now we're finding out he's a mystic and occultist.
I don't know if he was clean cut. He had quite a sordid life. What did Bill Burr say? Elvis was great, but he taught us not what to do, because really the idea of what we think of as a rock star, a celebrity, in modernity, Elvis was the first one to do it. The fame, the drugs, the women, making mistakes, everything else. I mean, he, as my book says, he was so innovative and he was so unique. There really is nothing like him since then. So, and as for the magician part, in my book, I do talk about, well, what is magic, right? Because there are words like magic and occultism, gnosis, enlightenment. We all throw them around, and we expect others to know our context, but nobody really knows the definition, or we all have varying definitions, or the definitions don't work, like occult. What does that even mean? Hidden, forbidden, esoteric? So I try to delineate what magic is, and I give all the way it is. Marketing, forcing a change of consciousness, a la Crowley, manipulating matter, being a co-creator with the universe, tricks on stage. And Elvis fits all of those bills, and he is superior, as I argue, to other magicians of modernity, whether it's Crowley, John Dee, you name them, he is far superior. And if my thesis is right, and I think it is, that rock music was never a form of entertainment, it was a form of spirituality, a sound modality. It deeply taps into this fusion of experiential Christianity, Pentecostalism plus blues, but the blues that is really infused with African animism and the plight of the slave in the diaspora and what they had to do. If I say that and Elvis is the high priest, then there's no argument, because rock music has transformed, hundreds of millions of people and changed the course of history, and is an integral part of American and Western culture. So that's and I know it's sort of a fighting words for a lot of people out there, but you gotta be bold like Elvis, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're on the same page here. I know I was raised in the South, being Southern Baptist-y, so the Beatles were bad. So I was never allowed to listen to the Beatles. But because my dad was in Vietnam and Elvis went in the army, and when I said the clean cut, he had like clean cut hair, compared to the hippies that my dad, so we grew up with Elvis movies, the cheesy Elvis movies and all that. So I want to get into that. Let's start with the weirdest of his birth, UFO, his dad. Let's kind of start with what happens when he's born.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like Elvis was fated to be Elvis from the day he was born. He had no choice, and that's what he was going to be. And it's almost like, as I write in the book, he almost knew when he was going to exit stage left from this cosmic prison or samsara, or whatever you want to call it. And I want readers to know or speculate, do we have a choice in our lives, fate versus destiny? I mean, all of us can look back at our lives and go, oh my God, it was almost destined that I arrive at this moment and meet this person. And everything fell into place. Was I involved? Were higher forces involved? So I speculate on that. And with Elvis, everything's bigger than life. Yes, like you said, he was born in abject poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi during the Great Depression, in the type of poverty we can't even imagine here in the United States. I don't think I can imagine that in North Korea. I mean, it was bad. People forget how Southerners, and I'm sure you've heard from your family, doesn't matter who, white farmers, blacks, Mexicans, it was an existence which was pitiful. So he was born, and because they had no money, they had this little shack they lived in. You can visit it even today. And no midwife, no doctor, no hospital. And it was a hard birth for Gladys, Elvis's mother. And at one point, Vernon went outside to have a cigarette, and this blue light came over the house. Whether this light was a UFO or some heralding star, like with Jesus or Buddha or Alexander the Great, who knows? But, Vernon freaked out, ran in, and then fate kept happening. Elvis's twin brother came out first, and unfortunately he didn't make it. He was stillborn, and 30 minutes later, Elvis came out. And that became a huge, momentous part of Elvis's life, the twinless survivor. We can talk about it more if you want. But those things immediately set the stage of who Elvis would be and the family dynamics and where he would go. So from the get-go, Elvis was destined to be Elvis.
Yeah, talk a little bit about I know you have Madame Blavatsky, his mom, but then kind of go into his mother, how she was, and then when she died, what he began to do. I think that's part of his downfall, with women. Can you
Yeah,
go a little bit into explaining his mother?
yeah, yeah. Without quoting Pink Floyd, Mother, should I build a wall?
Exactly.
Well, you start to realize, as you get older, you realize, oh my God, everything I do, everything that happens goes back to mommy and daddy issues. It really does.
Yeah, yeah,
They are such
yes.
powerful archetypes, and they are the portals of who we become at an early stage. A
Mhm.
lot of trauma happens, as the Buddha says, as soon as the baby's born, the baby cries because it is wise. Birth is traumatic. We're thrown into this new world. But with Elvis, yeah, I mean, being a twinless survivor, as the psychology has, found out or developed today, is a huge and very different psychological disorder. Twins are connected, for sure, but they're also connected in the womb. They communicate, they play, and when one perishes, the other one is born with the survivor's guilt. As Philip K. Dick said, who's also a twinless survivor, he said, I guess I got all the milk. It's a very hard state, and they have this void, like something is missing, and they don't know what it is because they consciously never interacted with this other part of themselves. So these individuals tend to be very sensitive. They tend to be seekers because people like Elvis or Philip K. Dick were always wondering, well, why did he die? We had the same birth. Why did Jesse leave the world? Why was I born poor when if he'd been at a hospital, we could have saved his life, perhaps? So they are seekers, but they also have this void within them. So twinless survivors they are workaholics. They can be very self-destructive. They're prone to addiction. And they have problems connecting with other people, especially the opposite sex. So again, fate was already there was making Elvis, but then it gets worse because after the birth, they did go to the hospital because of the death and everything, and the doctors told Gladys she would not be able to conceive. So almost naturally, she became very possessive. And this is, we call it helicopter parenting, but it's also known as lethal enmeshment, where the mother becomes so possessive because of fear of losing their child, they don't allow this child's ego boundaries to form. And that happened with Elvis. It was very Oedipal. And Elvis lived in this duality where he was the proxy husband, the king of the house already, but he also had to sneak around to play and do things like this little trickster because the mother, she was so possessive. And not surprisingly, people who suffer from lethal enmeshment tend to be, yes, workaholics, prone to addiction, self-destructive, and certainly have a problem making connections with the opposite sex because the mother becomes the proxy, queen to them. And I should add that Gladys, beyond the destruction she gave Elvis, also was born with gifts, supernatural gifts. She could see things in the dark, the spirit world. She could heal. She could astral travel, which is something Elvis picked up very early in his life. All these things she handed and gave to Elvis. So again, that also drove all these things. Jesse, wondering why Jesse had died. Jesse became his voice. He would have visions about Jesse, dreams, plus the supernatural abilities, plus the abuse, all that. It's like, okay, Elvis was ready to go from day one.
I know he immersed himself in, alternative spiritualities like Yogananda, Blavatsky, Manly P. Hall, all of these. And you had even said something in the book, like he had 200 books like that would follow him around. What was that? What was his desire for these esoteric teachings? What do you personally feel like? I mean, I know his childhood, but when do you think he really started gravitating, not just the hairdresser introduction, but when he really started gravitating towards these spiritual teachings?
He was always very curious about life. As many people, including biographers, say, he had a very keen mind, almost a scholarly mind. But he was very mystic and very curious. It's not in the book, but it's in my blog. I write that, at an early age, at 13, there was this rabbi that lived upstairs. And Elvis would just come up to this rabbi and say, well, how come you don't follow Jesus? And the rabbi laughed, and the rabbi and Elvis became friends. They'd have these theological discussions on the sidewalk every day. And the rabbi came to love Elvis because he knew Elvis was seeking. So he was always that way, and he was always trying to learn and modify. I mean, by the time he was a teenager, or early in his 20s, he decided, no, the doctrine of eternal damnation is pure, it's crap. Reincarnation makes more logical choice. So he was seeking, always understanding, but he was always sort of under that umbrella of the conservative Southern Christian. He had to keep things secrets. His mother would wash his mouth if he talked about astral travel or visions or all that. But after Gladys died in 58, I believe, came more trauma, and that was really deliberate. It was really hard on Elvis. So he kept seeking even harder the big questions of life. By the time it was the early 60s, he got the other trauma, was realizing that all this fame and money was just empty. He wasn't satisfied. He still didn't know why Jesse had been taken, why he was poor, why Gladys died at such a young age at 46. And more than anything, why was I famous? That's what he said. Why am I so famous when millions of poor people in the South are still, we're struggling to eat? That's when he met Larry Geller and Dayamata, and he went on this huge journey to find these questions and also make contact with God. He wanted to experience the divine. He wanted to know if he had a sacred purpose in this world, and he hoped he would be called to be, another ascended master or secret Freemasonry or something, so he could use his powers to help humanity. And in the meantime, he was like, well, until I get called, I'm just going to be an entertainer.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because you talked about that, even at Vegas, there being this Egyptian mystical, and I know, there was his outfits and jumpsuits and all that. Do you believe there was a magic show happening in front of us?
Shamanistic show for sure. It almost so logical when you think Elvis spends years studying the occult, reading book after book, meditating, doing yoga, doing magical practices. He has UFO experiences. I mean, and then all of a sudden he just kind of reinvents himself as this shamanistic looking guy with Egyptian motifs and Aztec and all this stuff. And there, of course, there's stories of him reading Tibetan prayers in between song, and he'd have prayer circles with his band and all that. You realize, oh my God, he was really he was like out in the open, say, I am a magician. I am the shaman of America. And I am going to show you all the magic in America, which was, the entire corpus of American art, bluegrass, jazz, country, which was part of his shows. And I'm going to mix it around. I mean, he used to start his shows with Strauss's The Theme from 2000 and Space Odyssey. So that right there shows you an astral aspect about Elvis. So yeah, then he really was just showing his shamanistic magical abilities to the world and spreading that gnosis to the audience.
I love that. That's so beautiful. I want to get into a little bit about Elvis's alignment with Gnosticism, especially I know he, had a fascination with the Gospel of Thomas, and what you had said, reincarnation. Do you think he took his Orthodox Christianity and his upbringing? Because I know he's drawn to gospel, and I think I still have a gospel CD of Elvis somewhere. Everybody does. The inner Christ, the living Jesus, Gnosticism. What do you think began to shape him, you know, in that arena?
Well, Elvis, yeah, he even said, I know the words to every religious song in the world. He loved anybody's quest to finding God. And of course, gospel was his favorite, but he had other tastes too. He loved the power of these religious songs and the plight of those who were singing them, who suffered, who were seeking God, who were trying to escape whatever terrible world they were in. So he really loved that, and he certainly loved Jesus. But again, when he became famous, like the Southern Baptists and a lot of the evangelicals turned on him big time, big time. I mean, we have to remember Elvis was insanely famous in the feast, but he was also insanely hated. The status quo did
Yes.
not want him there because he was upending everything: sexual relationships, racial relationships, art. He just threw everything upside down by his mere presence in a year or two. So a lot of the churches turned on him. His own pastor turned on him. Billy Graham denounced him publicly. He was called a Satanist. And again, like we said, he thought that the idea of a cruel God from the Old Testament made no sense. Hell made no sense. So he began to, you might say, turn away from these things and search for a different Jesus, the Jesus of the Gnostics, the Jesus of the Orthodox mystics, the Jesus of Theosophy, the so more or less cosmic Christ or inner Christ, or as Paul says, the Christ within, the hope of glory. That's the Jesus he wanted, the Jesus who perhaps was simply an self-actualized person who woke up to all his lifetimes and now was handing out this important information. That's the Jesus that Elvis became to embrace in the late 50s and early 60s, and that's the one he would continue to study and pray to and do rituals to, even magical rituals.
Yeah, there's this mystical ability, not just the paranormal encounters, I wanna get into that, but this mystical ability, because there were people that, like, screwed him over, but they still were like, "No, no, no, yeah, I screwed him over, but he could do these things." Explain, I know the healer, the telekinetic, the psychic, the astral traveler. Explain these mystic abilities that he had, experiences.
Well, again, yeah, he got them from his mother, and he would often have visions of Jesse and sometimes dreams about what was going to happen. Many people write he could pretty much know what you felt or what you were thinking as soon as you walked in the room. He was one of those people that he could walk into the room and turn up the heat or down the heat of everybody's mood just by his presence and so forth. Again, he could astral travel. He would tell people how he could just go from different solar system to another solar system and come back to his body. It was known that he sometimes at Graceland would just sit outside, just staring out into space, not on pills that night, but just stare into space, looking at the universe like some Zen monk for hours. It was no problem for him to go in that sort of a contemplative state. And yeah, as I write in the book, he prophesies very closely, well, not closely, the day he would die.
He was a healer, right?
Yeah, very big time healer. And that's the one part that he didn't have to hide from his background, because faith healing was part of the Pentecostal church. And even the other thing too, talking about Christianity, Pentecostalism, we must remember, was very shamanistic and experiential. It was also hated by other Protestant religions because
Mhm.
people would say that Pentecostalism is just mixing Jesus and sex. Because, yeah, you're in the Holy Spirit, but these people are crawling over each other and shaking, talking in tongues and hugging. It was, and that's the kind of stuff that Elvis, that's the kind of Jesus he liked, if you know what I mean.
Right, right.
But yeah, healing too, and it was natural. His parents healed him when he was sick because they couldn't afford a doctor. Priscilla herself writes that he could heal her headaches with a touch, that he healed his grandma's Minnie Mae's arthritis with a touch. He could heal hangovers and nausea. I guess he was popular at the parties. He didn't drink. But even bigger types of healing. One time he healed a driver. He was driving in his limo and he saw this bus on the curb, and he saw the driver walking around with a hand on his chest, and Elvis gets out, puts his hands on his chest, and the guy looks up like, "Yeah, what are the odds, right?" That Elvis said. And Elvis does his prayer stuff and heals this guy's heart attack, waits for the ambulance to come, and said that maybe seeing Elvis was enough, right? There are other instances, friends and bodyguards who had sick children. Elvis would heal them. He would heal their backaches. He once healed a broken leg of an individual while they were on a skiing trip. There was a singer, his backup singer, the Sweet Sensations. One time he was walking through the dressing room and he saw one of the singers, Sylvia Shamwell was her name, crying with the other singers, circling her. And Elvis goes, "Hey, what's going on here?" And she says that she'd been to the doctor and she had incurable stomach cancer. So Elvis gets down, gets all the other singers, and they sit there and they pray to her. Next day she goes back to the doctor, no cancer. And all the things I write in the book, there were always witnesses, and it's from lauded biographies by family member, close friends, the Memphis Mafia, and biographers. So it's all there. So Elvis was always, it was important for him to heal others, except himself.
There was also like fixing vehicles, influencing weather.
Yeah,
This is
that
wild.
that was Elvis's natural magic and crazy life. Yeah, Linda Thompson said once they were going out on a date in the early 70s and he brought a brand new Pantera. No idea what but it was a luxury car back then. And they get in and the car won't start. And Elvis is like, eh. He gets out, takes out one of his guns. He was always armed to the teeth and shoots the car 5 times in the engine, gets in and the car starts and they drive off. She's like, even the car was afraid of Elvis. I mean, because he just had a way of just changing reality, and weather was a natural one to him. He could do things like he was with friends. They were going to go play racquetball at his private courts. They're walking out and it's raining, and the friends are like, "Oh my God, it had to rain today." And Elvis says, "I'll take care of it." And puts his hands up and the rain stops. Other instances, again, many witnesses, he could make clouds move. He was in Hawaii with his girlfriend, Ginger, and he said, "Take a look at this." And he concentrates and the clouds part. And you could say, well, maybe, you know what I mean? You could say maybe it was a trick. He knew the wind currents and, if we all stare at a cloud, it will move. Does that mean we're moving it? But then he goes, well, now look at this. And he did that, and the clouds went back together just to prove it wasn't some sort of sleight of hand. And so over and over, there's these incredible stories that, again, hidden in plain sight. You can find these in Priscilla's biography, Ginger's biography, his bodyguards. They're all there. They've been out for, some of them 40 years, and they're all there for everybody to see.
That's so great. And I want to get into because this is just building up more and more to truly being the king. The UFO encounters and the alien. I know we talked about the blue light at his birth. I know he had beliefs, Ezekiel's visions in the Bible were alien technology, and Wanda June Hills, thought he wasn't from Earth, met some light form beings from a blue star planet. Can you go into the alien aspect, the UFO aspect?
For sure. I mean, it should be said that Elvis had a very sophisticated view of aliens. Now, remember, this is the 60s. People thought aliens just had combustion engines and were little green men and little.
Right.
Humanity didn't have a nuanced view of aliens, but Elvis was ahead of the curve in so many things. Again, sex, spirituality, all the stuff he was seeding, even martial arts he was doing before. He was almost like he was demystifying this stuff for the audience. Like I said, without Elvis doing martial arts in the 60s and 50s, we might not have a Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee because he made it cool. Remember in the 50s, it was like, these Asians and blacks and Hispanics. Elvis made it approachable and awesome for people to discover all this amazing traditions and art forms from other countries. But aliens, he was again ahead of the curve. He speculated without taking a stance, which is what we're doing today in 2025, aren't we? There's like 100 theories.
The same, yeah.
We're like, well, what is it? Well, we're not going to know. And he was the same way. He's like, he read von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, and he was like, maybe we were seated, and the ancient astronaut theory is right. Maybe the angels in the Bible are really aliens, and maybe the line should just be blurred, and they're one thing, and we just have to experience them. maybe these aliens are ultra terrestrials who have telepathy that are stopping humanity from nuking itself to oblivion. So he was very sophisticated and read all of these. And, he read the book of Enoch, and the book of Urantia, which is very popular in ufology. So he was definitely ahead of the curve. And again, he was a big sci-fi comic book geek. He was a Trekkie. He loved Star Trek. He even named one of his horses Star Trek. So it's pretty amazing again how sophisticated and scholarly Elvis was. And again, he wasn't going to settle on a single theory, just like he was still searching, well, which is the right Jesus. It's more like any mystic. He's like, we can speculate till the cows come home. Let's experience this stuff, and that's where the gold is. That's where the growth is.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is so important in your book that explains so much, especially about a lot of people talk about his challenges or his downfall, and like you had said, he prophesied his death. I want to get into the Jungian archetypes, and I know you talked about the trickster archetype, but the addiction that he had in his life, the egregore, how do these frameworks do you feel reveal these unseen forces that explain him, like his rise and then what happened to him at the end in his 40s?
Yeah, what I tried to do is I tried to offer many lenses to the rise and fall of Elvis Presley because he has taken such a mythical role. He's almost a demigod. It's almost we're past the point where you can just say this happened. Just like, people argue about the nature of Jesus or what Buddha did and all that. That's how high he has come up. So that I offer all the possibilities from why he might have fallen, from alchemy, conspiracy, Jung, Rudolf Steiner, all these ideas to try to give the audience something they might enjoy or accept. Ultimately, it's a mystery because, let's face it, ultimately addiction is a mystery. I mean, I'm a recovering addict, and I still don't understand why my brother died of drugs and I survived. You know what I mean? You wonder
Right.
about that. And you got to think, was grace, fate, and something that I struggle too. So with Elvis, it's the same. And I also see it through the lens of Alcoholics Anonymous because most people don't know that a lot of the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous, especially step 2 and 3, are based on Carl Jung. And even later in life, Bill W. reached out to Carl Jung and said, your ideas helped me create this system. And they had these long letters, and Jung was later of his life, and Jung talked about this archetype called the devil, but we may know it as, I don't know, Shiva, destruction, Ragnarok. It's this archetype that is a representation of destruction. You can't say it's bad because for creation to happen, something has to end, right? So this archetype is a necessary part of the universe. However, this is not the archetype you want descending down upon you or your tribe or your country. You want this manifestation as far away, these energies as far away. But, as Jung said, sometimes this devil archetype will go into an addict or an alcoholic. And as someone said, well, what's an addict? A true addict is somebody who wants pure destruction. They suddenly are possessed. They want to end their lives. What was I always told in AA? Alcoholism is suicide in installments. And they want to destroy their lives, and they'll drag their families, their job, their city down with them. So Jung always said, stay away from this archetype. Bill W. agreed. That's why don't drink or do drugs, because you can invite this archetype or mind parasite or cosmic force. And Elvis seems to have invited it, and he couldn't shake it off. Again, one of the many theories I offer of why Elvis didn't make it.
That's so interesting, and puts I think a better lens on him, and what is going on. I want to kind of get into the crossroads of influence, this convergence and transformation that you beautifully put in your book. How do you think? I know you talked about the shamanistic qualities, the Pentecostalism, the Southern blues and gospel. We always have that crossroad where you're sitting there with your guitar and there's the devil. How did this crossroads, these influence, this yin and yang, these symbolizations, how did they converge to create this crazy? I mean, you think about it, it's like only Elvis could have brought rock and roll into the world. Really,
He
if you
was
think about it.
powerful enough as a spiritual person, as a driven person, as somebody who nothing to lose because he had nothing to lose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nothing. Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard. Sometimes I read it and I read the book and I go, did I write this? I really think I got quantum entangled with Elvis. But That's the point. The shaman goes down into the spirit world and goes into the cross because it must deal
Mm.
with evil and good spirits. It must deal with this place of matter and the spiritual world, but also the trickster. In myths, that's where the trickster lies, whether it's Loki or Hermes or Prometheus, out there at the edges of the universe, away from everybody. But the trickster, like the shaman, brings in these gifts, fire from the gods. The Nephilim bring technology and makeup, but these gifts can be destructive. So that's where the Lord of the Crossroads is, and that's where the gifts
Mhm.
are. And many traditions, like the blues, you need to go to the crossroads and deal with the devil. And this devil is not like the Prince of Darkness narrative. He's more again of a trickster. He's a being that helps humanity, but also enjoys, shit posting with their spirit. And then you must go there. And of course, Robert Johnson is the most famous example. Guy with no talent disappears for a few weeks and comes back with this virtuoso on guitar, the founder of modern blues. And then he died early, and people said he went to the crossroads. And many other examples, both in myth, music, literature. So my contention is that Elvis did go to the crossroads, but he went into a place between heaven and hell and grabbed both energies. He got the
Mhm.
hellish Dionysian powers of the blues, but also the spiritual, lofty energy of gospel, and he fused them together. And it is true. I mean, when rock music came out, most critics thought that their concerts were like a Holy Spirit tent revival. They're like,
Mhm.
this is just Southern Christianity, but they've changed the words. Instead of Jesus, it's baby and all that. And even the term rock, when people would go into a fit, into a speaking in tongues, altered state in Pentecostal churches, and started dancing around, it was originally called rock and rolling. And again, think about Jesus and sex. So Elvis stood there at the crossroads and he grabbed these powers. And he himself once said, I carry heaven and hell within me and I must be careful. And this fusion, as I argue, at the crossroads brought out again this spiritual modality called rock. And Elvis was the high priest, shaman, or magician of this movement to help America, which was at a crossroads. That's where the trickster lies. The trickster is always there in between the ages, whether it's the coyote or Loki or any of these figures. And after World War II, post-war America was at a crossroads of technology, gender identity, religion, civil rights, so much that change, and Elvis was right there at the middle, helping, changing, and moving things that created what we know as post-war America in every way. I was even thinking, even comic books. Comic books we think as mainstream. Comic books used to be just for the lower classes. It was seen as a really
Right. Yes.
bad form of entertainment. It was banned in places like California and Louisiana. Elvis always loved comic books like a Captain Marvel, and his talking about comic books always, and the way he dressed looks like Shazam, also helped make comic books more mainstream. So Elvis was always at the crossroads. And even, I mean, it's destiny because even this, where he was born, Memphis, which is based
Mhm.
on the Egyptian city, used to be called Antawi, the city of two lives, the crossroads. Memphis
Mm.
in the fees was known as the crossroads of America. Black, white, jazz, blues, south, north, everything about Elvis, as the book argues, leads to this idea of the crossroads. And as I tell readers, if you want transformation, you're going to have to go to the crossroads and deal with this devil. That's the only way.
That's the only way. That's so good and such a powerful aspect of the book, I believe, that what everyone should get. This Igor of Elvis suggests this collective entity born, and a lot of it came from the power of his audience's adoration. I mean, he was the first, and we will always see pictures of the girls with the Beatles, but we forget how powerful Elvis was. How does this explain, do you think, his enduring legacy and then the energy exchange with his fan?
Well, again, he was a shaman, and we have to remember that in all cultures, a shaman, music and theatrics are essential. The shaman is
Mhm.
supposed to be the rock star of the tribe, and Elvis
Right.
embodied that. And again, he brought these energies to help the American public come to this new manifestation of the United States, this empire the world had never seen. Suddenly,
Mhm.
World War II happened, the Great Depression ended, and we were this brave new world of satellites and mass media and dark Soviets in the distance and highways, and everything had changed. And it was a big
Mhm.
culture shock, and Elvis was there to help people understand it and lead them into this way. And even the word teenager didn't exist until after World
Mhm.
War II. It's almost like Elvis came in this new form of demographic called teenagers who were rebelling, who were tired of the old ways
Mhm.
and the old music and art and segregation, and women have to be docile. Said, no, things have to change, and Elvis is going to lead us to change with the other, shamans of rock and roll, like Jerry Lee Lewis and BB King and all those other cats. And Elvis was there, but he was the main one. He really had a form of magic where, like any shaman concert, you're there. This shaman knows how you feel. They've seen
Mhm.
you. They've helped you know yourself. They have answers, but they're also healing your wounds and helping
Mhm.
you overcome the fear. And you go to these concerts and you all join together and you share in this energy. And the shaman helps you deal with this, which we've all done at rock concerts. I don't care if it's Taylor Swift or the Grateful Dead or Led Zeppelin. That's what rock music is. And Elvis
Mhm.
is the culmination, the OG, the goat out of the
Mhm.
for this. And it was incredible. You look at pictures of what women were doing. This is the
Yes.
1950s where women were
Yes.
supposed to talk back to men. And these women are just going into like this bacchanalia. They're going crazy and they're
Mhm.
waking up their kundalinis. And of course, as I argue, if you wake up and you know your body and your sexuality, your mind and your soul will come. When Eve bit the
Mhm.
apple, she woke up and realized she was naked, but she also realized she had agency. That's what Elvis was doing with women and also men too. Elvis taught men, you don't have to be like Gary Cooper and the chisel Frank Sinatra, stuffy and don't show my emotions, babe.
Mhm.
You can look vulnerable, you can be sensitive, you can be artistic and soft while still retaining your male energy. So it was incredible what he could do. And one time he almost got killed. The women really almost tore him apart like Dionysus. They had to get the police to track him. He made the mistake of saying, "Here's my hotel room keys," and 100 women just rushed him to destroy him. And there's nothing like it because, as I found, unfortunately, you hear these stories of the Beatles, like the women screaming at the airports. That was all planted. It was all because they wanted to copy Elvis's
Mhm.
magic. But with Elvis, it was 100% natural how he was and how he always was till he died. He's the only performer. I think he did 3,000 concerts. He sold out every concert he ever did, whether it was a small hall or the Houston Astrodome. Where Elvis went, it was going to sell out with rap.
He was also the first to do this. Like, I mean, here, I mean, like you said, this is the 1950s. Women were wearing like poodle skirts and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
This is not,
They had
the
no rights.
70s.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was the very first one to do this. So you have to see him as a shaman because of being able to have this, like you said, this Pentecostal experience. He was able to just walk, and then people would, like you said,
Yeah.
open up their kundalinis. I want to get into
Well, before that,
where.
yeah, and remember the
Go ahead.
shaman acts as a psychologist and as a marriage counselor. Shamans will often dress up as women to work with other women. So that's why, again, Elvis's androgyny was very
Mhm.
shaman, very normal in shaman societies too. But for the first time in history, women could objectify men. You have the female gaze. Before that, it wasn't allowed.
Mhm.
With Elvis, he was called a safe sex hero. Women can watch him on TV or the movies and just let all their energy out. So, yeah, very different.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I know you emphasize know thyself as the central lesson for Elvis's life and this, Gnostic pursuit of gnosis. What drove his search, do you think, as we're closing up on the hour, what do you think drove his search for self? And what can spiritual seekers, I know you do this with your radio show, but what can spiritual seekers glean from his quest for authenticity and purpose.
Well, yeah, that's one of the lessons. It is know thyself. It's towards the end of the book, and I think that's what Elvis was searching for. And yeah, I show places where he wrote the greatest thing is self-knowledge. I found others because that's the key, right? Some people want to
Mhm.
know the great questions in life, who I am and what is my purpose, my true purpose, not my ego's purpose, not society's purpose, because like all mystics, they know that everybody has a sacred purpose to heal the universe, to improve the tribe, and it's a matter of listening to the gods, to your inner self, to everything like that. And I think that's what Elvis was really searching, despite the trauma, despite the pain, despite, like you said, a world where people were threatening his life and backstabbing him, and Hollywood was just a den of vipers, and Vegas was a den of monsters, and he was always searching for that for himself. The great "Thy know thyself" from the temple at Delphi, which Apollo says wrote, the greatest dictum that there is. And even towards the end of his life, when his health was failing, he had glaucoma, he couldn't see, he had gut problems, he was taking too many pills, his body was breaking down, and he still had those occult books on his bed. He was still meditating, he was still trying to talk to God, even at the very end. And I think that's an important lesson, and we should all do. Know thyself. It's a very simple answer to what is life, which is, as they say, what's the meaning of life? Find your gift. What's the purpose of life? Give it away. And Elvis did it better than anyone.
That's so good. I got a last question. What really possessed you to write the book and get into, was it just being a huge fan of his, or was it like you started seeing some, like spirit begin to reveal things to you? Like what really, because this is such a unique book. It's so interesting.
I was never an Elvis fan. I still don't consider myself an Elvis fan, more like his friend. Like I said, it's almost like I became quantum entangled. I was always a Beatles person, and I still think the White Album is sublime. That will never change. But I always thought Elvis was just, the rock version of Mountain Dew or McDonald's. And,
Right.
he didn't do anything for me. Later in life, as I matured, I realized his impact on rock. I also read about his occult side, but I didn't think much of it. I respected it, but it was kind of like, oh, yeah, yeah, David Bowie does Kabbalah, Madonna does Kabbalah, Jimmy Page is Thelema, the Rolling Stones were Satanists, the Beatles were Hindu. Okay, whatever. But suddenly, what did John Lennon say? Life happens when you're busy making other plans. Suddenly this summer there was a whole bunch of synchronicities. I did a couple of ayahuasca ceremonies, visions, voices. Suddenly this force called Elvis came and said, I need you. My life became absorbed by the idea of Elvis for months. I couldn't stop listening to his music. I'd watch documentaries. It was just Elvis. And all of a sudden I realized that this voice wanted me to catalog a part of his life that the world had missed, that was right there, hidden in plain sight. But he wanted the world to know this because at his core, Elvis's quest and spirituality were just as important as his entertainment life. To him, they were. That was really, truly a part of his identity that he wanted people to know about or accept. He didn't broadcast it, but he didn't hide it either. So this voice told me it's time you show the world a part of me that they have missed. And I did it because I'm wise enough to know, as they say, you can ignore the gods and your soul and all that, but what happens is a lot of pain is going to come, like Jonah in the belly of the whale. Or you can go with the gods or your soul and do what your sacred quest is. And I felt that was mine, my sacred quest, if you would. Yeah. So I think that's what happened, and I'm glad. I'm glad I did. I felt like I'm doing a favor for a friend. A friend came to me and said, "Hey, man, I need your help. I need this down. You can do it, and just do it."
Yeah, it's so amazing, and I think it does more than just, even if you're not an Elvis fan, it describes to me what was happening to, like you said, to create, because basically he is the American dream.
Yeah,
Like
the
there
American
there's
soul. Yeah, he's it.
yeah, and the American soul, yes, yeah, and so to see what happened from the 1930s, 40s to 50s, and then to see him being at, like you said, that crossroads is just amazing. I want to thank you, Miguel, for being on HDL podcast. This was such great. You have mentored me through, your show. I first learned of your show. I think it was during COVID. I think during that time frame. And so I picked up on it. I think I typed in on Google, Gnostic podcast or something, and you popped right up first. And so I've listened to you, for years, and I encourage all our listeners to, make sure that is what's the best way for them. I know you've got a website. We're going to make sure everybody buys the book on the Amazon link below. But what's your website?
It's simple. It's my name, Miguel Conner, MIGELCONNER.com. And it's a simple website because you go there and you can decide which way Western man. There's the Elvis book connection. I have again, a Substack where I'm writing stuff that's not even in the book because remember, a lot of this stuff is still coming out. I am finding out all these stories. People are having visions. So we've only just begun with this idea of Elvis and his impact and meaning to America. I feel if we want to heal this country, which is fragmenting, I think Elvis is the solution. He's the essence. We can go back to Elvis. We can find out what it is to be an American and what it is to have an American culture, and it's fine. So they can find out the Substack, the Elvis book. I have a new podcast called Gen X Wasteland, which deals with Elvis and David Bowie, who I'm writing a book about, and music and culture. Or they can take the link to Aeon Byte, which leads to my Gnostic Clark Kent day job if they want to go there. And I also offer voiceover services, and it's got my social media accounts, all that good jazz.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so awesome. I mean, just I think your last episode was with samurais, so I mean, it's just
Well, it was
incredible.
about Shinto because
Yeah.
start finding out, I talk about the archons, and then you realize, oh my God, archons are in every tradition as mind parasites, as overlords. I mean, 90% of cultures have an idea of evil spirits trying to enslave humanity or eat humanity. So there's got to be something behind there too, and again, we go back to the shaman. As Paul Levy once said, we are all shamans in waiting. We all have that power to go to the crossroads and deal with those evil spirits. We can't put our heads in the sand and say, oh, everything's going to be all right and, we'll be fun. No, we got to go to war like a Shane Elvis did.
That's so good. That's so good. I'm gonna let you go. One thing, did you learn anything with Led Zeppelin, or do you know any? Because they were so. I know drugs played a part of it, and I know Jimmy Page or whatever. But how do you go from Elvis Presley, Beatles to Led Zeppelin? Like,
Well,
where does that group?
no, you started
Blows
it.
my mind.
No, you started Elvis because Jimmy Page and Robert Plant were Elvis fanatics. I mean, he was their inspiration. He opened
they
a doorway to the blues and jazz, and same with the Beatles. John Lennon once said, before Elvis, there was nothing. Same with John Lennon. Bob Dylan says, listening to Elvis was like breaking out of jail. Very Gnostic. So he was the nuclear explosion, the fountain, and they all just started innovating and adding to it and often stealing. I mean, I hate to say this, but
Yes, yes.
a trickster steals. It's a feature, not a bug. People accuse Elvis of stealing, and yeah, he's a trickster. Same with the Beatles. People accuse Led Zeppelin of stealing. People say Robert Plant is just a copy of Roger Daltrey, and he is.
Right. Yes.
They were ripping off a lot of people. David Bowie, too, was a huge thief, and he said it publicly. It's like, I steal and I make it better. F you. So but it really does start with Elvis, even though Elvis himself was stealing.
Right.
And with, of course, the Led Zeppelin, we have to get into the occultism because Jimmy Page was into the lead. Crowley. I found out this great story once where Jimmy Page and David Bowie got into a magical battle over an argument, and it's,
Did he buy Crowley's mansion?
yeah, Jimmy Page. So yeah, that's the other thing too. We exist in a society where even as I used to do, we dismiss spirituality. Oh, they're just eccentric, Ronald Reagan doing astrology or something. Oh, it's just silly. But we have to realize this spirit world is power, and it can give you power. People like Jimmy Page and the Beatles and David Bowie and Elvis, they had one foot in the spirit world the whole time, and they got a lot of power from it. Let's put it that way.
I love that. Well, thank you, Miguel. I encourage everybody to go to MiguelConner.com. We'll have that in the show notes below. And everybody get the book. It's amazing. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I had to do it.